Your psychology isn't broken, it has simply changed. But what really affects us? Is it the change itself or how we perceive it? That's exactly what we'll discuss today. If you're interested in gaining a new perspective on psychology and perception, make sure to watch until the end. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos. You're not ill. Your psychology isn't even disordered, it has simply changed. Just because this change affects you does not mean it's a problem. We cannot call everything that influences us a problem. The cold affects us, jealousy affects us, and so do arrogance and envy. Moreover, is it truly your changing psychology that affects you, or is it your perception of psychology? This field is such that if the esteemed Icehanim were to envy her neighbor, it would be regarded at most as a moral issue. However, if a child envies a sibling, it is accepted as pathological sibling jealousy and treated in a clinic. The excitement that dies down in marriage, or the excitement that surfaces during an exam, is labeled pathology. Medicine does not refer to pain as pain disease, cough as cough disease, or malaise as malaise disease, but psychiatry, just like with pain, cough, and malaise, labels stress, anxiety, and fear as stress disorder, anxiety disorder, panic attack disorder, etc. Note this, there is no illness. There is no disorder. There isn't even a trivial problem. So, if there is no illness, no disorder, not even a problem, then what affects us? If our psychology does not affect us, what does? It is the change in our psychology that affects us. Every change affects us to some extent. Affecting is the natural result of change. Seasons change, and they affect us. Our workplace changes, and it affects us. Our economic situation changes, and it affects us. Naturally, when our psychology changes, it affects us. But I am going even further and saying something else. What truly affects us is not even the so-called normal change in our psychology. Our changing psychology is merely a scapegoat. Of course, the burning sensation in our mouth is due to the chili pepper being hot. But can we attribute all the pain in our palate solely to that pepper? Some people eat a hot pepper and do not say, "My mouth burned." Others, eating the same hot pepper, exclaim, "My mouth burned," damn it, and overturn the table. The pain in our mouth is the combined result of the pepper and our taste. In the same way, the psychology we experience is the joint product of our changing psychology and the way we perceive it. You can think of perception as being like the palate that tastes the pepper. The palate evaluates bitterness and sweetness. Our perception evaluates the stimuli coming to our mind. Almost every person whose mouth burns immediately exclaims, "This pepper is very hot." No one says, "It's too hot," but my palate is overly sensitive. Similarly, no one says, "My perception is seriously disturbed." They say, "My psychology is seriously disturbed." Such perceptual errors are very common in human life. For example, someone might say, "The rain got me wet." Yet, if they had used an umbrella, the rain would not have made them wet. In that case, who is really responsible for getting wet? One might sit in front of a stove and say, "The stove burned me." But it is not the stove that burns, it is sitting in front of the stove. In short, whether it's getting wet in the rain or burned by the stove, it is the person themselves. Others, eating the same hot pepper, exclaim, "My mouth burned," damn it, and overturn the table. The pain in our mouth is the combined result of the pepper and our taste. In the same way, the psychology we experience is the joint product of our changing psychology and the way we perceive it. You can think of perception as being like the palate that tastes the pepper. The palate evaluates bitterness and sweetness. Our perception evaluates the stimuli coming to our mind. Almost every person whose mouth burns immediately exclaims, "This pepper is very hot." No one says, "It's too hot," but my palate is overly sensitive. Similarly, no one says, "My perception is seriously disturbed." They say, "My psychology is seriously disturbed." Such perceptual errors are very common in human life. For example, someone might say, "The rain got me wet." Yet, if they had used an umbrella, the rain would not have made them wet. In that case, who is really responsible for getting wet? One might sit in front of a stove and say, "The stove burned me." But it is not the stove that burns, it is sitting in front of the stove. In short, whether it's getting wet in the rain or burned by the stove, it is the person themselves. Here lies the difference between perception and fact. One who sees the fact as problematic and ascribes blame to it fights against the fact. One who sees perception as problematic and ascribes blame to it struggles with their own perception. One is like a puppet, the other like a puppeteer. One is the rain, the other is the umbrella. When you battle the rain and the clouds, you get soaked, but in the other case, you open your umbrella and walk happily under the rain. A rain that never rains, or a rain that rains without making you wet. Therefore, I always say, the difference between a psychology experienced through correct perception and a psychology never truly experienced is like the difference between apple cider vinegar and grape vinegar. Your psychology hasn't become disordered, it has merely changed. It is not an issue of fact, but of perception. It is not a panic disorder, but a disorder of panic perception. It is not an anxiety disorder, but a disorder of anxiety perception. It is not a thought disorder, but a disorder of thought perception. It is not an affective disorder. Rather, your perception of emotion is disturbed. It is not that your thinking is disturbed. Your perception of thought is disturbed. The former is akin to saying the rain got you wet, while the latter refers to the umbrella factor. It is not a problem with the fact, but with perception. Do not fight against the fact, fight against reception. By the way, isn't it called a panic attack disorder? They call it anxiety disorder, don't they? They call it depressive disorder or stress disorder. They try to rid us of these phenomena. If they were to say it is a disorder of perception, they wouldn't be able to prescribe medication. They must say it is a disorder of fact so they can give medicine. Otherwise, if they just call it a disorder or an illness, they risk too much from the start. If perception is disturbed, someone could write a book and claim to fix everyone's disturbed perception at home. A book would solve everything, just as I tried to do with my work. St. Austin to Gilson, you are not ill. You cannot package perception techniques and sell them at a pharmacy. You can't say, let's treat perception with medicine. By the way, would you entrust the mental health of the masses to a field that values such an important issue of perception no more than 5 milligrams of an antidepressant? Yet that's exactly what has been done all over the world. Most of the people who have read my book say, Teacher, learning that I am not ill even healed me. The real problem is the perception of illness. The perception of illness makes one ill. The subconscious cannot remain indifferent to the perception and belief of illness. Who can be indifferent or apathetic to the phenomenon of illness? The idea of I have cancer can create what is called major depression. 2 days later, when someone says, the tests were mixed up, you are not ill, not a trace of the previous psychology remains. Perception initiates and perception terminates. That is the magical, transformative power of perception, the power of the perception of illness. A person breaks up with the one they love. They are hospitalized with a diagnosis of severe depression. Heavy medications are started with the claim your serotonin is low. 3 days later, the beloved returns out of regret, and the young person's psychology suddenly improves. What happened? When the beloved returns, did she bring 500 milligrams of medication as a gift? Perception initiated, perception terminated. These two examples prove something. Experiencing psychology does not mean being ill. An organism can experience psychology without having an illness. Doesn't the industry ever talk about perception? Sometimes it does, but it considers perception only as a detailed factor in the treatment of illness. This difference is no less significant than the difference between saying, I love you, with a mere flick of the tongue, and saying, I love you, with a heartfelt, elaborate declaration. In fact, it is as significant as the difference between studying a little and studying a lot. Studying a little is not so much akin to studying a lot as it is to not studying at all. In both cases, the result is the same: failure. Using perception as a detailed partner alongside medication in combating fact is not the same as placing perception at the center and considering fact as a mere detail. Nevertheless, the industry's claim, we are also talking about perception, should not mislead anyone. One person might add a pinch of onion to a meat dish, while another uses dried onions to make an entire main course. I worked for 25 years in the psychiatry clinic of a state hospital. The distant attitude of psychiatrists toward us psychologists always made me ponder, not that I wished to belittle them. They had friendly and modest interactions with the cleaning staff and others. Later, I realized that there were some things they did not want us to learn. Psychiatry would always send us people who had been diagnosed. This is the illness. Now you do the therapy, they would say. Look, the diagnosis given often does not match the categories in textbooks. They say it's depression, but there is no depression present. Is it a matter of I don't care and doing therapy based on depression, or of properly informing and warning people? At this crossroads, two paths appear. One is easy, the other troublesome. It even requires risking conflict or being ostracized. You are a young person from a village who has overcome many stages, become a state employee, and now in your mid-20s far from home. Is it worth risking everything, going out with the nation, to sit alone in a corner, and even face further issues like complaints or slander? I said, it's worth it, and I took the risk. Thus, I began to explain to everyone that the current clinical picture was not complete and that the psychology being experienced was not an illness. While the psychiatrist in the next room would say, "You are ill," I would immediately reply from my side, "No, you are not ill." Thank God I managed to complete 25 years safely. I was not subjected to slander, defamation, or mobbing. I even had a fight with a psychiatrist once, and we ended up rolling on the floor together. These are stories for another book. I saw that people benefited greatly. After repeating this countless number of times, I discovered one thing. At the root of the experienced psychology lies the fear of illness. This was a very important discovery, but how could I build on it? People would ask, "Teacher, if I am not ill, why does it affect me?" And so you begin to wonder, how can a psychology that is not an illness affect a person? You brood for days. After long periods of mental incubation, you eventually hatch a new idea and concrete examples. For instance, you might think, even the grief of losing a child is not an illness, but look, it affects you. Bit by bit, listing numerous details and examples, you gradually weave a tapestry. At first, I would tell those whose clinical picture had not yet settled, you have no illness. Then one day, I remembered that these issues are indeed not diseases. I knew it, but hospitals, doctors, clinics, and such had almost hypnotized me with their concepts. It took me nearly 5 or 6 years to recall that. Then I immediately began to tell everyone that they were not ill. Even those diagnosed with panic attacks would come. They would ask, "Teacher, if I am not ill, why is my heart racing?" One day, an example struck me. Even during Friday prayers, or while climbing stairs our hearts beat fast, yet that does not create a psychological state. "I've got it," I exclaimed. And when I said, "I've got it," there were those who scoffed, saying, "Look at what you've come up with." When a man sits under a tree and thinks of an apple, he discovers gravity and revolutionizes science. When one does not understand the mental effort involved, everything seems easy. For that reason, it is inevitable that those who spend 2 hours pondering a couple of lines in a petition end up dismissing a 200 to 300 page book with disdain. They say that panic attack is not an illness but a disorder. Yet here there are physical signs, heart palpitations, trembling, etc. Could this be an illness? But here it is called a disorder, and a disorder does not mean an illness. Now I am clear on this. Yes, while climbing stairs the heart beats fast, which is a physical symptom. However, a physical symptom does not necessarily mean an illness. Thank God, I have added yet another stone to the wall. But I still have a long way to go. Days later, something else dawned on me. Why does the rapid heart rate while climbing stairs not induce a psychological state? Because the brain does not associate that increased heart rate with illness. Again, after intense mental exertion, I noticed this detail. What labor, what countless sleepless nights, in a freezing cold room. That is why I can never condone underestimating the effort. From these cold and dark nights, perhaps 2 novels could be born, but I am not very skilled at writing novels. The story is long, the subject is deep. Let's say we have said enough about that, and continue with our main topic. Today, we explored the nature of psychological change and the power of perception. Remember, it's not just the facts, but how we perceive them that shapes our lives. If you found this video helpful, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss the next one. See you in part 15.